Hey guys, and welcome to definitely not the re-upload of my meta builds on every hero for update 2.9. 2.9.1 hotfix included, just the overall update is called 2.9. For those of you that know this video, you'll read left to right. There'll be some ore symbols, and ore will either represent the items either side of ore, or the items above and below the ore sign. So that's a decision that you make based on the items that you want for your build, given the situation. Apologies for the re-upload. I forgot a specific build, Weapon Power Petal. She's quite strong right now. Just wasn't thinking. Haven't been getting her too much sleep because my puppy has been a bit of a little monster. But thank you for letting me know. 300 of you managed to catch the first video without the Weapon Power Petal. Hopefully the rest of you will not have to go through that. So Best Chuck forced me with his VG8 performance on a Weapon Power Adagio to include Adagio as a Weapon Power build path. You'll notice that some changes have been made in his CP build path to include maybe a Dragon's Eye or a Shatterglass down the line. It's not a bad choice. Moving on to Alpha, she's very strong right now. So strong that I think I mistakenly left her out of my top picks, which I might redo next week to include Alpha. And again, with Clockwork as a third item, really strong. You could also go for Eve of Harvest if you wanted to, or Shatterglass depending. But Clockwork, probably the best third item that you could go for on the CP Alpha. Ardan's not going to have much changes, really just as a captain. And captain builds are very versatile. You might say, but Excoundrel, Crucible is situational as well. Yes, it is, but it's probably the most flexible of the situational items out there. It's always good to have an extra reflex block for your team as well as the shielding that it provides. And obviously, when I come to captain builds, really just Fountain and War Treads realistically are like the core of most of my captain builds. Everything else is quite flexible. Let's have a look at Baptiste. Hasn't really changed much in terms of build path, but his build just got stronger with the buff to Clockwork. So Baptiste CP in a pretty good space. I know that some European players will be sad that I left out Weapon Power Baptiste, but maybe next time, my friends. Baron definitely making a comeback now that Tension Bow has been buffed. Also, the straight critical strike build for him, especially on the update 2.9.1 hotfix, is very good. So Baron, not quite fully meta, but definitely there or thereabouts. Quite strong right now. Having a look at Blackfeather, everybody's favourite hero right now. His CP and his weapon power build paths are very strong. You can go the Serpent's Mask, the Breaking Point Tyrant's Monocle build, or a Sorrow Blade at the end there. Or you can go for the Poison Shiv build, which is the one below. I have seen some full crit Blackfeathers work out, and his CP build path has remained pretty similar, although you could include a Clockwork instead of the Eve of Harvest as your third item. Catherine's CP builds, her captain builds are pretty similar below, obviously Echo and Nullwave being important. But CP builds, you can go for the Storm Crown for better jungle clear, or you can go for an Aftershock only build and maybe include a Broken Myth. You can switch between the Broken Myth and Dragon's Eye depending on what you like. I think Dragon's Eye is pretty good on Catherine though, because it's pretty easy to stack up. Celeste, obviously frostburn, now a situational item, not exactly first item buy on any CP carry right now. You replace that directly with Shatterglass, or you could consider a Dragon's Eye, so mostly Celeste has stayed the same apart from that one item. Churnwalker, he's only a captain, I'm afraid, guys. Again, core captain build, you can work around it. You could consider an Echo. You could make some pretty cool plays, but I think it's a little bit harder to pull off than most captains with Echo. I've quite liked building Clockwork on him, and I've not really got another item to build, so you could always consider that. Here we go. Flicker, barely viable as captain, let alone anything else. I know I've seen some North American streamers play Weapon Power, Flicker, and win, but not convincingly enough to make me think that it's viable outside of being a troll high elo streamer. So moving on to Fortress, I think he still needs the Storm Crown in his CP build path to allow him a efficient and quick jungle clear. You could just go for Stormguard Banner if you liked. Captain build largely unchanged, and again, not going to explain it too many times, but captain builds are very, very variable depending on what you need for the situation. So again, you should always take captain builds with a pinch of salt and apply the items to the situation that you're in. Okay, Glaive, his weapon power build path kind of sucks right now. I kind of think you just have to go straight up critical strike and look for burst heavy orientated gameplay, so you can consider the Tension Bow. Obviously his CP build path is already played, but if you don't want to play the Storm Crown variant, I sometimes like to include the Clockwork later in his build path after the Aftershock and Broken Myth. Having a look at Grace, pretty much unchanged, still works really well with the Echo, obviously still situationally can consider the Shatterglass. She's in a pretty good spot right now. Grace is just a good captain. Not overpowered, but just good. Grumpjaw, got all 3 builds. You don't see too much CP or Captain Grumpjaw anymore, and sometimes you see a bit of weapon power Grumpjaw. His build path is largely unchanged. I took out the Storm Crown, doesn't really need it, and I put in the Clockwork on his CP build path. I think that would make a pretty good Grumpjaw all round. Gwen, definitely coming back into the meta with the tension bow buff, so you can go down a breaking point orientated build, or you can just finish up with a tornado trigger and a tyrant's monocle to add a bit of critical strike. I would maybe consider Spellfire on CP Gwen as a 4th item. I think it could actually work. If you want to play CP Gwen, I'm not saying it's any good, but if you'd like to play CP Gwen, feel free to test out Spellfire. Idris definitely been hit quite hard recently. His weapon power build path, pretty similar to where it was, the 3 items that kind of make up the most of it. You could also go a critical strike focus build path. His CP build path, you just go for the Shatterglass or the Dragon's Eye first. Everything else remains largely unchanged. Having a look at Joule, she is pretty much unchanged across this update. The build path that I always tend to stick to is the Sorrow Blade into the Tornado Trigger and Double Tyrant's Monocle. That generally is where I'm pretty happy to build. Kestrel is going to remain pretty similar. I often like to go Sorrow Blade, then go for a Tyrant's Monocle, and then go for a Tornado Trigger. So I often like to go Tyrant's Monocle second, just because it makes those Glimmer shots hit harder on the first turret, and taking the first turret is pretty important if you haven't taken it by the time that you've got your Tyrant's Monocle already. Having a look over at Koshka, just pretty simple Aftershock focused build. Nothing changed here. You could also consider a Clockwork as a 3rd item for Koshka if you wanted to. 3rd offensive item, obviously then have the option of the Shatterglass or the Eve of Harvest as well. So both of them are very, very viable. Moving on to Krul, his tension bow changes means that he's going to remain fairly viable in the weapon power build path. You don't have to build tension bow, you can just straight up go poison shiv breaking point and then go full tank. That's probably enough to perform Krul's main function, which is win that mid game. His CP build path is kind of bad, but if you want to go for it, go for the Storm Crown. Maybe go for an on-hit build with tension bow and Aftershock combined. Having a look at Lance, you can go for the Captain build, which is largely unchanged, as is his weapon power build path. Like Krul, if you wanted to, you can play a Tension Bow Aftershock Lance. It isn't too bad. But again, Lance mainly seen in Captain and a straight-up weapon power role from the jungle. Having a look at Lyra, again, primarily taking a Captain role this update, and she scales very, very well with health, so things like Contraption, Fountain, Crucible, War Treads, all of which work really well with her. You can also use Echo and get double heal off. Her CP build path is at the top if you wanted to consider that as well. Ozo, really good right now. You can go for the Aftershock Broker Myth build, and then I've actually quite liked building Dragon's Eye, but you can also obviously consider Clockwork. Dragon's Eye, I think, works really well because it increases his healing, but Clockwork obviously great because he is a ability-focused hero. Petal, this is the one that I definitely didn't forget to put in the last video. CP build path is slightly changed, no more frostburn first because the Munions don't apply frostburn, so it's going to be Shatterglass or Dragon's Eye first, and then everything else you can see as it follows. If you build Dragon's Eye first, go for the Shatterglass. Her weapon power build path, critical strike or nothing, so just follow that one weapon power build path. That's kind of how most people play her. Phinn is just a captain. Yeah, nothing changed here. Still works well with Echo. Could go for a Shiver Steel if you really wanted to, but I don't see many people do. It's just there if you need it. Reim. Not much changed about Reim's build path other than the order that you build it in. It's now mainly done Shatterglass, Eve of Harvest, Broken Myth, and then everything else is a defensive item. You could consider a Dragon's Eye instead of a Shatterglass, but it's a little bit harder to maintain the stacks if you're not hitting people consistently, so often people just prefer the straight up burst damage of the Shatterglass. Reza, very strong jungler on this update. The core build of the Aftershock, Broken Myth, and then Eve of Harvest. You could also then consider a Clockwork as a 4th item, or a 3rd item if you really wanted to and didn't want the sustain, but other than that, Reza very, very strong right now. Having a look at Ringo, still got his weapon power and his CP build path. I would probably primarily focus on straight up critical strike for Ringo on his weapon power build path, but if you're facing lots of armor, Bonesaw there, obviously breaking point still good. CP build path largely unchanged. Shatterglass first, then into alternating current. Having a look at Rona, she's pretty strong. People say she's got a CP build path. I beg to differ. She's really only good in weapon power. She can do win games as CP, but, you know, you could win games as anything. I could win games as weapon power Ardan if I was playing at tier 3. So, you know, it's really her weapon power build path is the primarily viable build path. Sword's a really good carry right now, something that I also overlooked. There is a Serpent's Mask build for weapon power Saw, but the win rates are just way higher if you're building him Sorrowblade Breaking Point or Sorrowblade Critical Strike. So those are the two builds that I would suggest. Here's CP build path. As you can see, you can consider the Clockwork and the Dragon's Eye coming through. They aren't too bad items. Obviously, with the Frostburn nerfs, Samuel also got hit pretty hard by Frostburn. You're going to replace that out for a Shatterglass, and then his build path will remain largely unchanged. But Samuel's not in a great space right now. Used to be able to spike a lot quicker with an early Frostburn, now has to wait for the Shatterglass, so his power spikes come a bit later when everyone else is getting the same kind of power spikes, and he's just on a lower level at those power spikes. Skaarf here, and you can again take out the Frostburn first, go for a Shatterglass or a Dragon's Eye, much like Celeste and Samuel. Those CP build paths are pretty similar. As you can see here for Skye, you could consider a Dragon's Eye for Skye if you wanted to, but I think it's quite hard to maintain stacks on Dragon's Eye in general, but I actually don't mind it on Skye, so it's not a bad thing to consider for Skye. Consider Dragon's Eye, also a weapon power build path there. I often like to consider it instead of the Shatterglass though, so not instead of the Broken Myth, instead of the Shatterglass. Here you've got the Taka builds. On his CP build path, you kind of still need at least Stormguard Banner because his jungle clear is really slow. He's also another hero that I might consider a Spellfire on because of the bleed damage, and you combine that with Spellfire, gives you a lot of damage over time. And Vox, the man of about 1,000 million builds. You can see here the standard build of the Poison Shiv, Sorrowblade Breaking Point. You could also include Tension Bow, but he's also got an interesting build with Poison Shiv, Breaking Point, Double Tyrant's Monocle, or just a pure Critical Strike build, which works out quite well as well. But Vox, very, very versatile, very malleable in his types of builds. So, hopefully I included everything on the second time lucky. Sorry about that. The weapon power build path not getting included for Petal, but I will obviously have sorted that now, so all great. I will see you next time, guys, and a big shout out to my Discord members, specifically Rayolo Swag. I did say that I would give him a shout out, so if you want to shout out, feel free to join the Discord and ask, and I might do it if you ask about 6 times like Rayolo did. Righto, see you soon.